Professor Domingos Viegas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you also for the kind remarks that you made towards my team. And I would immediately like to ask Julia Faga and Claudia Morsut to give an overview on the roadmap project Bulletins and Thematic papers. This is just to set the stage for the discussion that we'll have afterwards, in which we invited colleagues, coordinators or representatives from other EU projects that are addressing also these problems. Unfortunately, there are many projects in Europe dealing with risk management, and it was not easy for us to choose to select some of them. So we thank those who had accepted our invitation and to share with us this knowledge. And this is something that the European Commission is looking forward to have more and more in the future, this interaction and connection between the projects. So please, Julia and Claudia, the floor is yours for the next 20 minutes, please.
Good morning. Do you see my screen?
Excuse me,
yes,
Andrea,
Julia, yes.
Andrea, did you ask did you raise your hand, Andrea? Do you want to say something?
No, sorry, was a wrong, was my mistake, sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I am Julia Faga, a researcher of Youth Centre Foundation, and in the roadmap project, I am the person in charge of the publication of bulletins. In this presentation, Claudia Morsut and I will present the workflow that led to the creation of bulletins and the thematic paper with the related problems and possible future developments. One of the main objectives of the roadmap project is to collect, analyze, and review good practices, recommendations, lessons learned in prevention, preparedness, and response in the disaster risk management field. To achieve this goal, various actions have been implemented in the project, including the design and realization of bulletin and thematic papers. In particular, the bulletin are the results of a constant scanning of good practices in disaster risk management and use innovation performed on the web, also based on suggestion and supporting material from the advisory group of the project. The bulletin in the project were conceived as a few pages document with a bi-monthly publication aimed at decision makers, which had to report the results of an initial selection of good practices. In each publication, we have collected good practices relating to the management of an emergency in a multi-risk perspective, and we have not focused on a single phase of the disaster risk management cycle, but we have tried to analyze all the phases of the cycle. The main structure of the bulletin includes a section dedicated to the project and its development, followed by an introduction to the chosen topic, a section dedicated to selected good practices, and a section dedicated to the disaster risk management initiatives and news on the topic. Because the publication of the bulletin is very frequent, and because it's not really easy to find good practices, the definition of topic, of themes of the bulletins was made in the earliest stages of the projects. And when we define this topic, we decide to select a topic that tried to take into consideration current issues, like as you can see, the impact of the pandemic on emergency management, forest fire emergency management and associated risk, management of floods and landslide risk, management of volcanic eruption and associated risk, management of climate change and food supply. And by the end of the May, we will publish the 7th bulletin on management of industrial accident and environmental pollution. Instead, the first and the last bulletin are dedicated to the development and the results of the project. But what was the procedure for selecting data? The problem of this type of selection is that the disaster risk management good practices are not easily to find, and when even when available, are available in a non-structured structured form. So for this reason, one of the first phases of this part of the project was to understand where to find relevant information and how to make a first selection of the found good practices. For sure, scientific papers, reports, civil protection protocols, humanitarian networks, and governative website were the starting point for the good practices selection. In fact, they allowed us to learn about tools, websites, research projects, and documents which contain possible good practices. Once found these tools and documents, we try to make a selection of good practices, choosing those are already validated in different situations, more situations throughout exercise or emergencies, and coming from reliable sources like for the region mentioned above, in the bulletin, there is no space to describe every single good practices. But we decide to include in the part of the bulletin dedicated to the good practices, the abstract and the references of the documents in which the good practices can be found. As a first consideration, we could say that during the selection, we have seen that for certain topics and phases, it is possible to find a lot of materials, while for others it is very difficult to find good practices, and this is issue will be discussed by Claudia Morsud after. With this, I have concluded the part related bulletins, and I leave the floor to Claudia Morsut for the thematic papers and issues and future developments. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. I will continue now, and Julia will flop the slides on my behalf to avoid the changes on the screen. So I'm Claudia Morsut. I'm representing the University of Stavanger in Norway, one of the partners of Roadmap, and I am an associate professor in societal security here in Stavanger. And I was responsible to follow the development and implementation and writing of 3 thematic papers. The goal of the thematic papers was to provide a critical review on about good practices inside and outside the European Union. And the topics of these 3 thematic papers were chosen based on several topics that we propose inside the Roadmap project proposal. And these several topics were submitted to the attention of our Roadmap advisory group. And then in accordance to them, we choose 3 main topics. Next, please. The thematic papers are slightly, if not very much different from the bulletins. They are, first of all, standalone documents, longer than the bulletins. We try to keep these documents within 30 pages. As I said, we foresaw 3 publications, and we choose a wider target audience, not only decision makers, but also the scientific community and risk and crisis managers. In all the 3 thematic papers, we try to explore the chosen topic in a multi-risk and scenario-based perspective. And actually, these 3 thematic papers were written by experts. So as soon as we decided for the topic, we launched a call of experts. And for each thematic paper, we had 2 experts who wrote the content, and a small group of Roadmap experts follow the development of and writing. And then all the 3 thematic papers have the Sendai framework as guideline to categorize, evaluate, and extract good practices. Next, please. So here in this slide, you can see the 3 topics we chose. The first one was, to some extent, a thematic paper that sought to set the context of the full Roadmap project, looking at good practices in multi-hazard risk scenarios. So we sought to find good practices within a situation where we had the pandemic, the ongoing pandemic, or hopefully the pandemic which is going towards an end, and another risk or hazard happening at the same time. The second and third paper, they are still in the writing phase. The thematic paper 2 is soon to be launched, and the thematic paper 3 also will be finished, hopefully, at the beginning of June. And in the second, we look again at good practices in risk crisis communication, also from a multi-hazard risk perspective. And we did the same for these 2 very important and relevant policies, building back better and leaving no one behind. And as I just said, we use the Sendai framework as our, let's say, guideline to select and extract these good practices. Next, please. And here you can see again, as much as we did for the bulletins, we follow a pattern. We started, of course, with an overview of scientific papers, reports, projects, the European Union website, especially the DG ECHO website. And of course, we look at national governments, what they produced. So we collected information through these 5 sources. And then we use the Sendai framework as a sort of analytical framework, again, to select good practices. In the first thematic paper, the Sendai framework was used in terms of looking at good practices that to some extent mirror the targets, the priorities, and the guiding principles. Sorry, whereas in the second and the third, we try to refine in a way our research by actually establishing criteria based on certain articles of the Sendai framework, which were touching the topic that we wanted to address in each thematic paper. Next, please, Julia. Here, I and Julia tried to summarize some of the issues we actually met, both in the writing of the bulletins and in the writing of the thematic papers. Let's say there are common issues, except perhaps for the last one. First of all, we argue that there is actually a huge challenge here, that it needs to be addressed in a way or the other. What are actually good practices? And how can we distinguish good practices from lesson learned and recommendations? And we sought actually to do this in the first thematic paper by giving a concrete and definition of what good practices are. But we posit that there is still quite a lot to do. And then, of course, there is, especially for those belonging to the academic world, a terminology issue. We discovered that working and reading sources belonging to different disciplines, belonging to national governments, agencies working on the field, there is a discrepancy in the terminology in how issues are addressed and defined. Then, both in the bulletins and in the thematic papers, we chose by purpose, of course, to use an heterogeneity of sources. But of course, this gave us the challenge on how to organize these sources and how also to label and categorize the information we use. And then there is something that we actually find missing in our writing of these bulletins and thematic papers. We found some very interesting ex post reports, and for ex post reports we mean reports giving us information about good practices or lesson learned and recommendations written after the negative event was concluded, mainly by the Red Cross. But we were a bit surprised that there were not several of these ex post reports, which could have been very, very useful to extract good practices. And one of the reasons we of course made the mainly hypothesis was time constraints, but also probably the lack of resources inside these agencies to sit and around the desk and actually put down in a written form good practices or lessons learned. And then we wrote in English. Both the bulletins and the thematic papers are written in English language. And of course, English, as you all know, is a language that can reach a quite wide audience. But at the same time, we're very much aware that especially local disaster managers working in the field at local level, perhaps several of them don't manage or don't master the English language. And so to some extent, what we publish in Roadmap is highly probable that it's not reaching this kind of audience. And then also we raise ourselves the question how to share the material. Are all the reference documents really accessible for the audience we want to reach? And then the third and last issue that we want to share with you it was mainly an issue raised by the thematic papers. By choice, again, the thematic papers were addressing or are addressing a wider audience, both policymakers, risk managers, civil protection managers, and of course, academics. I'm saying, of course, because I belong to the academia. And the goal was, to some extent, to further reduce the science policy divide, but still to find a balance in writing a thematic paper that is addressing both science and policy. It's not at all an easy endeavor. So we wonder all the time if we were managing to find this good balance. Next, Julia, I don't know if you want to add something, or if I can just go, thank you, to the next last slide, where we tried to find some partial answers. Of course, this is an ongoing process, and this is why the process, I think personally, is so interesting and challenging in a positive way. I think, or we think actually, that for future developments, especially on the research side, we really need to we should be really able to define better, also from mainly from a theoretical also viewpoint, what lessons learned are and what good practices are. And again, we really hope that what we have done in the thematic paper 1 is a good starting point, a solid starting point, scientifically speaking. Then, of course, this is a never-ending challenge to define a common terminology that is embraced and understood by all the parties we want to address. Policymakers, again, risk managers, civil protection agencies, and so on. And then a future development that we wish to promote is what we have called in this slide a single point of access to share information on collected materials. And in this sense, we believe that the work the European Commission is doing with these knowledge centers, with the newly established civil protection network platform, all these initiatives in a way are going in this sense to create these huge platforms where you can reach and find a lot of information. But of course, there is still quite a lot of work to do. And then there is the issue of language. We would like to promote more, let's say, a better approach to actually think that all our work should be constantly translated in multiple language. Of course, English is the main language we use, but still, how to reach local agencies, how to reach local risk managers who are not mastering the English language, to share our research and our findings. And then again, to further reduce the divide policy science, we need perhaps a better strategical thinking on how to involve policy and makers, decision makers in research. And again, this is part of a process. We don't think we have the answers with the roadmap, but I think all the projects under the call of roadmap to some extent have sought to address these future developments. And with this, I want to conclude this first presentation on the roadmap behalf. I would like to thank my colleague Julia, and I would like to thank, of course, the audience listening to us. And if you have any question, please use the chat, and we are more than happy to answer to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Julia and Claudia, for your presentation.